Picture this, it's 2012. The Los Angeles Lakers are in a weird place. They're still a marquee franchise, still built around Kobe Bryant, but the roster, it's stale. The magic is starting to fade. They're desperate to make another championship push, and in that desperation, they considered something that today feels almost impossible to imagine: signing Allen Iverson. Yes, that Allen Iverson, the answer, the MVP, the man who dropped 48 on the Lakers in the 2001 finals. But there was a catch. Before the Lakers would even consider him, they wanted him to prove himself in the G League. That's right, one of the most iconic players of his generation, an MVP, a cultural icon, being told, go to the minor league first. It's a story that's wild, humbling, and honestly incredibly revealing about how the NBA works. It's about the circumstances that led to this bizarre scenario, what it says about Iverson, the Lakers, and the league, and why it still sparks conversation more than a decade later.
Iverson fast break, 3-on-2. Right through the lane. Iverson with a layup.
They're starting to defend much better right now.
Here's Iverson. Yes. And Allen Iverson.
Let's rewind to 2012. The Lakers were coming off a brutal stretch. They had been swept by the Dallas Mavericks in 2011, and while they still had Kobe, Pau Gasol, and Andrew Bynum, it was clear that the roster needed help. They weren't athletic enough, they weren't deep enough, and most importantly, they didn't have an elite guard to take some of the pressure off Kobe. Stephen A. Smith, reporting at that time, revealed that the Lakers were exploring every possible option for the backcourt help, and that included a name nobody would have expected: Allen Iverson. Now, Iverson hadn't played in the NBA since 2010. He'd done a stint overseas, he'd been in and out of the headlines for all the wrong reasons, and most teams had moved on. But for the Lakers, desperate for a spark, desperate for someone who could break down defenses, the thought of adding Iverson, even a diminished version, was at least worth considering. But they weren't going to just hand him a contract. According to Stephen A., the Lakers front office made it clear: if Iverson wanted a shot, he'd have to first go to the D League, what we now call the G League, and show that he could still compete at an NBA level. Think about that. A player who once carried the Sixers to the finals, a player who had an MVP trophy, being asked to ride the buses and play in empty gyms to prove he still belonged. To understand why the Lakers were even entertaining this, you have to look at their roster construction at the time. They had size. Bynum was coming into his own. Gasol was still productive, Kobe was still Kobe, but their guard play was rough. Derek Fisher, a leader and a veteran, was clearly past his prime. Steve Blake was solid but limited. They needed a guard who could create, who could put pressure on defenses, who could be another weapon in crunch time. Iverson, even in his mid-30s, still had that reputation. Sure, he wasn't the MVP version anymore, but this was still Allen Iverson, one of the most feared isolation scorers in NBA history. For a moment, you could almost see the vision. Kobe and Iverson sharing the floor. Two assassins, two killers, and on one team. But there was a problem. Two problems, actually. One, the Lakers weren't convinced Iverson could still play at an NBA level. He'd been out of the league for 2 years. Conditioning, attitude, ability, all were question marks. And two, Iverson himself. Pride was always a huge part of who he was. He wasn't about to humble himself to ride buses to prove he could still hoop. That was never going to happen. To really understand why the Lakers thought that this was even a reasonable ask, you have to go back and look at how Iverson's career wound down. After that magical run to the finals in 2001, Iverson kept putting up numbers, big numbers. He had 8 straight seasons averaging over 25 points. He was still electrifying, but the game was changing, and Iverson's game didn't really change with the times. Iverson was still Iverson, still that ISO-heavy ball-dominant guard. And when his athleticism started to fade, his weaknesses started to show. His stops in Denver, Detroit, and Memphis were rocky. He clashed with coaches, he struggled with coming off the bench, and by the time 2010 rolled around, teams were hesitant. That's what made the Lakers' interest in 2012 so fascinating. They knew the baggage, they knew the risk, but they also knew in the right situation, Iverson could still maybe give them something special. And then we get to the part of this story that still blows people's minds, the G League. It's almost insulting, right? The idea that a player like Iverson, one of the faces of the league for a decade, would have to prove himself in the minor leagues. But from the Lakers' perspective, it wasn't personal, it was practical. They wanted to see if he could still go. Could he still take contact? Could he still run an offense? Could he still keep up with the speed of the NBA? and from a business standpoint, it would have been low risk. If Iverson looked good, they could bring him in. If not, they avoided the circus. But here's the thing, Iverson was never going to do any of that. Pride, ego, whatever you want to call it, that wasn't who he was. And honestly, that's part of what made him great in the first place. That unshakable belief in himself, that refusal to compromise, is what made him AI. So the deal never happened. Iverson never went to the G League, and the Lakers moved on. Instead of taking a chance on Iverson, the Lakers made a different move that summer. They traded for Steve Nash. On paper, it was a dream. Nash, even in his late 30s, was still one of the smartest point guards in the game. Pairing him with Kobe, Powell, and eventually Dwight Howard felt like a super team in the making. But we all know how that turned out. Nash got hurt, Dwight never fit, the team chemistry was a disaster. And the Lakers, instead of contending for a title, became a cautionary tale about chasing names instead of building teams. Meanwhile, Iverson never played in the NBA again. His career quietly faded out. And then what if? What if Iverson had swallowed his pride and taken that D-League stint? What if the Lakers had rolled the dice? Remains one of the great alternate timelines in NBA history. And that brings us to the bigger lesson here. No one, not even a legend, is bigger than the game. The NBA moves on, always. It didn't matter that Iverson had an MVP trophy. It didn't matter that he once carried the league for a decade. By 2012, teams weren't looking at what he had been. They were looking at what he still could be in the right situation. And that's the brutal reality of professional sports. It's not about what you've done, it's about what you still can do. We've seen it with so many stars. Carmelo Anthony, forced to sit out until he adapted. Dwight Howard, humbled, bouncing around the league until he found the right role. Even guys like Russell Westbrook today, who have had to adjust their games to stay relevant, Iverson wasn't willing to do any of that. And in a way, that's part of why his legacy is so unique. He stayed true to himself, for better or for worse. Today, Iverson remains one of the most polarizing and beloved figures in NBA history. On one hand, you have the critics, people who point to his inefficiency, his stubbornness, his refusal to adapt. On the other, you have the fans, people who love him for his authenticity, his fight, his style, and his impact on culture. Because make no mistake, Iverson's impact on basketball and culture is bigger than any stat line. The baggy shorts, the tattoos, the cornrows, the arm sleeve, that was AI. He changed what it meant to be a superstar. He brought hip-hop culture into the NBA in a way that nobody had done before. And his game, the crossover, the fearlessness, the way he attacked the rim against giants, that stuff will never be forgotten. So when we look back at this story, the Lakers wanting him to play in the G League before giving him a shot is almost an insult. But it's also a reminder of just how unforgiving this league can be. It's a young man's game, and eventually even legends have to face that. So what do you guys think? Would Allen Iverson in a Lakers jersey have worked? Could he have helped Kobe get one more ring? Or was the G League ask justified? And was this just the NBA being the NBA? Cold, calculated, and focused on the future? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and share this video with another Hoops fan who loves a good what if. Because at the end of the day, the NBA isn't just about stats and wins, it's about stories like this. Stories that remind us that no matter how big you get, the game is always bigger. I'm Damian Peters, this is Basketball Network, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.